Imagine waking up to the sound of chainsaws, only to find strangers in your backyard, cutting down your trees without a single warning. But here's the twist. Those weren't just ordinary trees. They belonged to a university research program, protected, documented, and worth thousands in scientific value. And the ones who ordered them destroyed? The HOA board. Before we dive in, drop in the comments where are you watching this from? I'd love to see how far this story is reaching. For years, my backyard wasn't just another piece of land with a few scattered trees. No, this was my personal sanctuary, a place where nature and science quietly shook hands. When you stepped onto the grass, it didn't feel like an ordinary yard. It felt alive. The towering oak trees stood at the edges like silent guardians, their branches stretching out like protective arms, casting cool, comforting shade in the burning summer months. And when autumn arrived, those same branches would let go of golden leaves that blanketed the ground, making it look like something pulled straight from a painter's canvas. But what most people didn't know, what even some of my neighbors never realized, was that these weren't just ordinary trees. They were part of something much bigger, something far more valuable than just yard decoration. They were living subjects in a university research program. Each trunk had tiny numbered tags fixed to them. The soil beneath them wasn't just dirt. It was carefully studied, analyzed, and recorded by experts. These trees were part of an ongoing climate resilience project, a study designed to unlock secrets about how our world changes, breathes, and adapts. It wasn't unusual to see graduate students quietly walking through my backyard, their clipboards in hand, jotting down observations with serious, almost reverent expressions. Some would measure the bark thickness, others would collect leaf samples, while a few would kneel on the ground to scoop soil into little labeled bags. Their faces lit up in excitement every time they found something new. You could almost see the spark of discovery in their eyes. To me, these visits weren't interruptions. They were reminders that what stood in my yard was more than just greenery. It was a living laboratory, a contribution to knowledge. Each tree held stories within its rings, silent timelines stretching back decades, whispering about droughts, floods, and seasons long forgotten. These weren't just my trees. They were teachers, witnesses to time itself, and their importance was documented, funded, and protected. And I loved that. I loved knowing my backyard wasn't just a space for barbecues or family gatherings. It was a place where science lived, where curiosity bloomed, and where the future of environmental research was quietly taking root. Every time I stepped outside, I felt this quiet pride, like I was safeguarding something rare, something people in other neighborhoods could never imagine having right behind their fences. But here's where things take a darker turn. While I saw life, knowledge, and potential, the HOA board saw something very different. To them, those towering oaks weren't guardians or research subjects. They weren't treasures that could change how we understand the environment. To the HOA, those trees were nothing more than overgrown nuisances. And that difference in perspective, between a sanctuary and a nuisance, was the crack that would eventually split everything wide open. Because what happens when people who see only rules and appearances clash with something that carries silent, immeasurable value? It began on a morning that seemed like any other. The air was crisp, the kind that makes you want to linger outside with a cup of coffee. I had barely taken my first sip when a strange sound drifted in through the window. A low, buzzing growl, unnatural, mechanical, and out of place in the calm rhythm of my neighborhood. At first I dismissed it. Maybe someone was trimming hedges or doing a little yard work. But then the sound grew louder, and then came the thud, a heavy, gut-punching crash that shook the ground, followed by another and another. My heart clenched. That wasn't yard work. That was destruction. I rushed outside, still clutching my coffee mug, only to freeze in disbelief. Men in neon vests and work boots were already in my backyard. Chainsaws screamed as they ripped into the trunks of my oak trees, sawdust filling the air like a dusty storm. Limbs that had stretched toward the sky for decades were crashing to the earth, their branches shattering across the grass. It was chaos, brutal and uninvited, I shouted, my voice cutting through the roar of machines. "What are you doing?" "Who told you to do this?" One of the workers barely looked at me. He just shrugged, wiped sweat from his forehead, and muttered the words that made my blood run cold. Board orders. Said these trees were too close to the fence line, the board. The HOA board. I stood there, stunned, trying to process what was happening. Not once had I received a notice. No letter in the mailbox, no email. No knock at my door. Nothing. They hadn't even given me the courtesy of a warning. They had sent men with chainsaws into my yard as if it was their property to command. My voice rose, my frustration spilling out. You can't just do this! These trees aren't yours, they're part of a research program. Stop immediately. The worker gave me the kind of look you'd give someone who just didn't understand the big picture. And then he turned back to his saw, revving it louder, as if drowning out my words. I felt powerless watching it happen, the bark shredding, the branches falling, the history of those trees erased in minutes. It wasn't just the loss of shade or the beauty of my backyard. It was the erasure of something irreplaceable. Every cut felt like a betrayal, not just to me, but to the years of study those trees represented. The noise drew neighbors out of their homes. Some whispered, others stared. A few shook their heads in disapproval, but none dared to challenge the workers. After all, the HOA's word was law in this neighborhood, or at least that's what everyone believed. But as I stood there, fists clenched, one thought echoed in my mind louder than the chainsaws themselves. They had crossed a line they didn't even realize could come back to burn them, because those weren't just trees. And this wasn't just an HOA decision. It was the beginning of a storm they could never have predicted. I immediately contacted the university's forestry department. When the lead researcher arrived and saw the stumps, her face drained of color. She whispered, almost in disbelief, "Do they have any idea what they've done?" These trees weren't just random samples. They were part of a decade-long climate resilience study, funded by grants worth tens of thousands of dollars. The data they carried, the rings, the growth patterns, the soil chemistry, was priceless to science. In one reckless decision, the HOA had erased years of research, the kind of work that could shape policies on climate change and environmental sustainability. And here's the kicker. The HOA board hadn't even known. They thought they were just tidying up the neighborhood. When I confronted the board at the next meeting, their smugness was unbearable. The trees were unsightly, one member declared. They violated community standards. I slid the research documents across the table. University seals, grant approvals, academic reports, all tied to those trees. The room went quiet. Suddenly, the board members' confidence cracked. They hadn't realized they had trespassed not just on my rights, but on federal research property. The university's legal team stepped in quickly, preparing lawsuits and demanding restitution. Word spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Some neighbors whispered that the board could face massive fines, even personal liability. For the first time, the all-powerful HOA seemed small, vulnerable, and cornered. The stumps remain in my yard, a graveyard of what once was, a reminder of arrogance and carelessness. But the story didn't end there. The university filed official complaints, the local media picked up the story, and soon the HOA's reputation was shredded as badly as those fallen branches. My once quiet backyard became the center of a legal storm. Looking back, I realized the irony. The very board that tried to enforce neighborhood beauty destroyed something far more valuable than appearances. They cut down knowledge. They cut down progress. And in doing so, they exposed the dark side of unchecked authority. Now, whenever I stand by those stumps, I don't just see loss, I see proof. Proof that when power goes unchallenged, it can destroy more than it protects. And proof that even the mightiest HOA can be brought to its knees by the truth. And that was just the beginning of the chaos the HOA never saw coming. What started as a simple yard cleanup turned into a legal storm that shook the entire neighborhood. So what do you think? Was the HOA just careless, or did they cross a line that can't be forgiven? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because I've got plenty more unbelievable HOA tales and real-life dramas coming your way. Trust me, you won't want to miss the next one.